Through the mist each 7 years, the Isle of Hy Brasil shimmers into view, a dark shape rising from the waves of the Atlantic, half-glimpsed and unreachable, waiting for something to become. A promised land, a fairy world, a den of thieves, a barren rock, the home of angels, aliens, and misplaced spirits. A lost island is a blank canvas, an empty notebook, a formless ball of clay. A lost island is 1,000 things, on 1,000 different days. In the writings of Procopius, a Byzantine scholar of the 6th century AD, we find the story of the island of Britia, an island of the dead. The island is shrouded in darkness and mist. It is hard to say exactly where it lies, and there is much debate among scholars to this day as to its exact nature and whereabouts. The island is divided by a great wall that runs from north to south, on the far side of which is a region of darkness and foul air, inhabited by vipers and other wild things. But on the near side of the wall live mortal men and women who are kin to the Angles, Frisians, and Saxons. It is said that the island lies between Britannia and Thule, and there is a consensus of opinion that Procopius was writing about the island of Britain, which had once formed part of the Roman Empire. But there are certain other details in his description, which suggest that the island belongs more to the realm of myth than to the real world, and that it has in its nature something of the character of the island of Hy Brasil. Procopius tells of a small community of farmers and fishermen living on the coast of France. These men and women would feed themselves by catching the bounty of the sea, and by tending the land which lay beside the sand dunes on which they had built their houses. Their lives were little different from those of any other people living in this way, except for one thing that set them apart. These people were exempt from taxation. The kings of France had waived their right of tribute in consideration of a special duty that the people of the village carried out. For the beach beside the village was the chosen place, where the souls of the dead would gather, where the ghosts of the departed would wait to be taken across the sea, to the lands that lie beyond the veil of death. The men of the village would take it in turns to assume this sacred task, and would go to bed early on the days when it was theirs. At midnight, the chosen ones would be woken by a knocking at their doors. On each door would be given 3 loud raps that would shake the wooden huts and houses and echo in the darkness. On hearing these knocks, the men would open their eyes and light their candles. They would climb from their beds and dress themselves, while outside on the beach strange voices would call on the wind. They sounded like the cries of gulls, but no gulls fly abroad at night, and the men in the huts knew all too well that the sounds came not from any mortal creatures. Then they would set out into the darkness, across the dunes and down to the seashore, where they would find strange boats waiting on the shoreline, boats that were not their own. They would climb inside and begin to row out into the open sea, and as they set off they would see that the boats sat low in the water and were laden down at one end, with the gunwales almost dipping beneath the waves. The men would row until their arms ached, and as they rowed they would hear the sound of whispering about them, strange voices muttering soft and low. But no words could they distinguish, no matter how hard they strained their ears, for by necessity the voices of the dead are hidden from the hearing of the living. After no more than an hour had passed, the men would find themselves in sight of the island, and sighing with relief, they would take their boats ashore, knowing as they did that the journey had in no way been a natural one. For in normal times the island of Britia lies a day and a half from the shores of France. Then the men would sit and wait as their passengers disembarked, the boats becoming lighter in the water as they did so. And as they stepped unseen onto the shore, from the darkness ahead of them a voice would call, addressing each invisible soul in turn. "What is your name, and where have you come from?" And the souls would answer, and as each one did, their voice would fade away into the darkness and vanish forever into the black, black night. And when the final soul was gone for good, the living men would turn their boats around and set off into the open sea, and row with all their might for the land which they called home. They would arrive just as dawn was breaking, and take themselves back to the warmth of their huts and the happy embrace of their wives and children. And as they did, they would try to forget the mysterious island of the dead, which no other living soul had seen, and on which they knew they too would one day disembark. And so the story ends and the island disappears, vanishing into the mist once more, until the fog clears once again and we glimpse it in a different form. A lost island is a blank canvas, an empty notebook, a formless ball of clay. A lost island is 1,000 things, on 1,000 different days. The fog will be clearing once again at the Howard Assembly Room in February and March 2014.